A powerful black lawyer was about to have the dinner he had been looking forward to at one of Memphis' most prestigious restaurants. Dressed impeccably, he walked into the upscale restaurant as if the place belonged to him, and, in a way, it did. He was a person who, through hard work and dedication, had earned respect and success in life, something that everyone noticed when they saw him. All except one man, a racist white cop who was in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong mindset. The lawyer barely had time to smell the sophisticated food when the police officer entered the restaurant, with an arrogant posture and haughty gaze. He looked around the place as if he were looking for trouble, and, when he found the lawyer sitting, he addressed him with a provocative tone of voice, already insinuating that something was wrong. Tension hung in the air, the whispered conversations in the corners ceased, and all eyes turned to the scene. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" the officer asked dismissively, his voice filled with cold arrogance. The lawyer, taken by surprise, remained calm. He was used to this kind of situation, but it was difficult to hide the fury that burned inside him. "I'm waiting for someone." "What's the problem?" he replied, trying not to cause a scene. But the police officer, realizing he had an audience, decided to extend the humiliation. "Waiting for someone, huh? Or are you just trying to pretend to be someone you're not? This is no place for you." The sentence was clear, the insult was direct. He looked the lawyer up and down, with a look that said he simply didn't belong there, as if a well-dressed black man, alone in an expensive restaurant, could only be suspicious. The lawyer stood up calmly, trying to maintain control. He knew that any wrong move, any out-of-place word, could make the situation worse. But the situation was already getting out of control. The policeman approached, his eyes burning with cruel satisfaction. "Let me see your wallet," he ordered. Not as a question, but as an order he expected to be obeyed. The lawyer, with no alternative, handed over his documents. Upon opening them, the policeman gave a short laugh. "Doctor of what?" "Trouble doctor. Because that's all you know how to do." An empty laugh echoed through the restaurant. At this moment, the surrounding customers were trying to pretend they weren't looking, but everyone was in shock, whispering in low voices, and some recording the scene with their cell phones. It was a scene of total humiliation, and the lawyer knew it. He was being judged not for who he was, but for what the police officer wanted him to be, someone inferior, someone who had no right to be there. Every word, every look, seemed to be a sentence handed down by the police officer, an attempt to reduce him to the place he believed was right for someone like him. "You should know that people like you are not welcome here," the officer continued, each word laced with venom. The lawyer looked around, trying to find some kind of support, some voice that would rise up to stop the injustice. But nobody did anything. Nobody. Just the silence of a room that witnessed the humiliation of a man who had done everything to gain his place in the world. At that moment, the lawyer felt a mixture of emotions pulsing inside him. Anger, frustration, sadness, but also determination. He knew that this police officer had no idea who he was or the power he had. "I had no idea of the storm I was about to face." But for now, he kept this anger inside him, like a volcano about to erupt. He kept every word, every insult, every look of contempt that police officer gave him. Saved it for the right moment. "You are a jokester. But you know what? I'm going to get out of here, and you're going to regret ever crossing my path," he said finally, looking straight into the officer's eyes. A look of defiance, a look of knowing there was still a game to be played. The officer laughed. Again, mockingly. "Oh, come on, tell me. And what are you going to do? Process the system? Good luck with that, buddy. People like me make the rules, and people like you follow them." The lawyer smiled, but his smile was not one of joy, it was a smile that hid something more. Something much bigger. He knew he had all the power to turn the game around. And he knew he would. But he wouldn't let the police officer know that. Not yet. "We'll see," he said simply, his tone calm but threatening. And he left the restaurant with his posture straight, leaving behind the echo of a silent promise of justice. What that officer didn't know was that he was dealing with someone who not only knew the rules of the game, but also knew how to bend them to his advantage. He didn't know that by trying to humiliate someone he thought was inferior, he was actually sealing his own fate. The turnaround was about to happen. Justice was on the way, and it wouldn't come the way the police officer imagined. Doubt hung in the air. What could a powerful lawyer do against a police officer who believed he was above the law? How could a single encounter turn the life of a man who was sure of his power and impunity upside down? The story was just beginning, and the ending, you will never imagine. No channel plow of twist, we believe in justice and respect for everyone. We want every person to feel valued, regardless of their color or origin. We know that racism is a painful reality for many, and we want to make it clear that we do not tolerate any type of discrimination or prejudice here. This story is about fighting for what's right, standing up against hate, and refusing to be treated as inferior. We hope you feel inspired and empowered as you listen to this narrative full of twists and turns. If you're enjoying our content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive more impactful stories like this. Now, relax and get ready, a good story is about to begin. Let's go. Memphis, a vibrant city, full of history and contradictions. In the center of its busy avenues, with tall buildings and constant movement of people, life goes on at its own pace, and it's easy to get lost among the glow of neons and the incessant noise of cars and hurried voices. But, even in the midst of this urban chaos, there is order, structure, or at least there should be. Jamal Carter, a renowned and respected lawyer, walked confidently down these streets he knew so well. He wasn't just any lawyer, he was a man who had fought to get where he was, breaking through invisible barriers that many didn't even realize, but that for him were relentlessly real. Jamal grew up in the South, in a neighborhood where police presence was frequent and not always welcome. From an early age, he knew what it was like to feel the weight of suspicious looks. But contrary to what many expected, he never allowed these experiences to shape his view of himself. Instead, he used it as fuel to build his career, an impressive career that saw him become one of the city's most respected lawyers. At 37, he had become a strong, determined figure, a reference for the community. He fought for the rights of those who were often ignored, gave a voice to those who were not heard, and, above all, was someone who did not tolerate injustice. His victories in court were recognized, and there were no doubts about his ability. But at the same time, Jamal knew that his skin color would always be the first thing many people would see. He learned to ignore the whispers, the crossed looks, the subtle gestures that tried to diminish his value. Still, he maintained a strong presence, always wearing his sharp suits and walking with his head held high, even when he knew he was entering hostile territory. That's how he lived, and that's how he insisted on being seen, as someone who belonged wherever he decided to be. And it was exactly that confidence that he took with him that night when he decided to go to dinner at one of the finest restaurants in Memphis, the kind of place that boasts luxury and exclusivity. The soft lights, the aroma of sophisticated dishes, the jazz music playing in the background. Jamal liked this type of environment. He liked to reward himself after long days at the office, defending his clients, facing trials that seemed to have no end. It was a personal refuge, a place where he could relax and enjoy the night without worrying about the daily struggles. On the other hand, within that same environment, there was a man who was about to come into direct conflict with Jamal. Sergeant Travis O'Connor, a white police officer, was everything one could expect from someone who grew up with a closed mindset and an absolute belief in his own power. Travis was known for his stern and inflexible behavior. He believed he was above anyone who didn't wear a blue uniform, and this arrogance gave him an aggressive stance, as if he was always looking for trouble, especially when that trouble took the form of people who, in his distorted view, they didn't belong there. That night, Travis was off duty, but his aggressive stance and judgmental gaze didn't rest. He entered the restaurant as if he had the authority to dictate who should or shouldn't be there. For him, anyone who did not meet his standard of respectability was suspect. And when his eyes met Jamal, sitting elegantly, dressed in an impeccable suit, enjoying the refined surroundings, Travis felt that familiar impulse of suspicion and contempt. Jamal, in turn, was oblivious to the police officer's presence, focused on mentally reviewing the case of an important client he would soon defend. He was about to order his drink when he noticed the police officer approaching. It was not uncommon for people to come up to greet him, many recognized him and praised his work. But Travis's approach was different from the start. The police officer looked at him with a mix of disdain and superiority, as if he were about to challenge his presence there. "Good evening. May I help you?" Jamal asked in a polite but firm voice. He was not the type to be easily intimidated, and his gaze remained fixed on the officer's eyes. But Travis didn't even respond to the polite greeting. He looked around, taking in the expensive restaurant full of white customers, and looked back at Jamal, as if he were doing a thorough inspection. "Are you waiting for someone? Or are you just passing through?" The words were filled with a suspicion that Jamal already knew well. The policeman wasn't asking, was accusing. Accusing a black man of simply being in a place that, according to his racist mentality, he should not be. Jamal, containing the discomfort and anger that was beginning to rise, remained calm. "I'm here for dinner. Something wrong with that?" But Travis seemed determined to create a problem. His face hardened and he took a step forward, as if to mark his territory. "You know this place is expensive, right? And to be honest, you don't seem like the kind of person who can afford it. Maybe I should take a look at your documents, just to make sure everything is correct." The atmosphere, which had previously been calm and elegant, became tense. All the customers present began to pay attention to the scene, and whispers of astonishment and discomfort filled the silence. Travis, in turn, maintained an authoritative stance, trying to intimidate Jamal, while Jamal was visibly trying to control the growing indignation within himself. "Are you insinuating that I can't pay for dinner?" Jamal asked, his voice shaking slightly, not with fear, but with suppressed fury. "I'm just doing my job," Travis replied, with a tone that brimmed with arrogance and contempt. "So come on, show me your wallet. That is, of course, if you actually have one." For a brief moment, Jamal considered giving in, showing the documents and ending it right there. But why should he? Why, after everything he had achieved, did he still need to prove that he had the right to be there? His eyes met Travis's, and in that instant, he made a decision. That night would not end like this. There would be consequences. The confrontation was just beginning, and both men still had no idea where it would lead them. The path Travis was about to take would lead to a destination he would never have expected. The tension between Jamal and Officer Travis wasn't confined to the restaurant that night. The hours that followed were marked by thoughts that hovered like storm clouds in both of their minds. Travis bragged about his courage in putting Jamal in his place, telling and retelling the event to his friends, who laughed as if it were a big joke. On the other side, Jamal felt anger burning with every memory of the look of disdain, the provocative tone, the public humiliation that the police officer had imposed on him. But Jamal was not a man to just talk about justice, he did justice. And he knew something had to be done. The next day, Jamal's routine returned to normal, office meetings, important cases and constant calls. But beneath his professional appearance, he was planning his response. It wouldn't be immediate, it wouldn't be impulsive, it would be calculated, strategic. He began gathering information about Travis, investigating his background, his reputation within the corporation, his past actions. Jamal had sued police officers before for racial discrimination, but this case was personal. And the cop who thought he could publicly disrespect him was about to find out who Jamal Carter was. Meanwhile, Travis went on with his life, paying no attention to the incident. For him, it was just another day putting someone in their place. But as the days passed, something began to bother him. Jamal hadn't made a fuss that night at the restaurant, he hadn't shouted or raised his voice. He had accepted the humiliation with a look that Travis, at the time, didn't understand. But now he realized that that look said something more, something that made him remember that night with a certain discomfort. Deep down, a doubt crept in: had I made a mistake by messing with that man? A few weeks passed, and Jamal decided it was time to act. He set up a meeting with the Memphis police chief, who already knew him from other cases and knew that Jamal was not the type of person to file complaints lightly. The conversation was formal, but loaded with seriousness. Jamal presented evidence of several previous allegations made against Travis, cold cases, complaints of discrimination and improper use of force. He knew Travis had a dirty history, and it was just a matter of finding the right thread to pull and unearth it all. Jamal presented his case with relentless clarity, showing that this officer was not only above the law, but also repeatedly trampling on it. "Do you understand that this could have serious repercussions for the department?" said the police chief, a man who recognized the weight of the evidence Jamal had gathered. "I have no choice but to investigate." "I completely understand," Jamal replied, maintaining his composure. "And I also understand that this is a department that values justice, right? So let's act accordingly." As the internal investigation into Travis began, he had no idea what was coming. When they called him for a routine meeting, he entered the room confidently, without suspecting that, on the other side of the door, were the serious eyes of his superiors. The mood in the police office was heavy, and Travis quickly realized something was wrong. "Travis," the lieutenant began, "we've received some reports about your recent conduct. We need you to explain a few incidents, including what happened at the restaurant a few weeks ago." Travis paled. The memory of the night with Jamal came back like a punch to the gut. He tried to speak, to justify, but he knew that every word that came out of his mouth was a desperate attempt to protect himself. And the more he talked, the deeper he sank. At the end of the meeting, the police officer who previously walked with his chest puffed out and arrogant left the room with his head down and with the shadow of uncertainty weighing on his shoulders. But Jamal knew that wasn't enough. He wanted Travis to experience, even if just for a moment, the vulnerability and fear he had caused so many other people. Jamal began mobilizing the local community, making Travis' story of discrimination and abuse known. On social media, the incident went viral, and the pressure on the Memphis Police Department only increased. And in the meantime, Jamal maintained his discreet but no less powerful stance. He knew that for Travis, the worst was yet to come. The day Jamal finally confronted Travis directly was unexpected for the officer. In a fortuitous encounter, Travis was patrolling the streets when he saw Jamal walking, this time accompanied by a local television crew who was covering the case. He approached, trying to maintain an appearance of authority, but Jamal smirked, without any fear or hesitation. "I came to check on you, Travis," Jamal said in a calm, confident voice. "I hope you're ready, because things are going to get interesting." "What are you talking about?" Travis responded, trying to sound aggressive, but the insecurity was visible. He knew something was happening, but he had no idea what it was. Jamal approached and, in a low tone that only the officer could hear, said, "I tried to give you a chance to do the right thing. But you chose the wrong path. Now, you're going to learn what it means to stand up to someone you know. The law, and knows how to use it." Travis's face paled. He knew Jamal was serious, and fear began to rise within him. The lawyer's words echoed in his mind, as anger and panic mixed in his chest. He tried to maintain control, but something inside him was breaking. You think you can take me down?" "I am the law," he replied, but his voice no longer held the same conviction as before. It was a trembling voice, trying to hide the fear. "You were," Jamal corrected, with a cold smile. "Now, the law will show you who is really in charge." As Travis tried to understand what was happening, the fear that his career and reputation would be destroyed began to come to fruition. Every step he took felt like he was being watched, every word he said seemed to condemn him further. And at every moment, the stage was set for the inevitable climax. The humiliation Jamal had suffered was about to turn into something much bigger, something no one, not even Travis, could have predicted. Everything was about to change. The clatter of keyboards filled the courtroom. The murmurs of those present created a dense, heavy background sound. Travis O'Connor's name was on everyone's lips and in every headline. The tension was palpable as the audience waited for the session to begin. But what few knew was that, at that moment, Travis' career, his pride, his arrogance and his distorted sense of authority were at stake. And on the other side of the court, Jamal Carter was ready to conduct every move of this game, with the precision and determination of a chess master. It was impossible for Travis not to feel the weight of the gazes of the people filling the room. His department colleagues, his superiors, community members, everyone was there. And each one had an opinion about who he was and what he represented. For the first time, Travis felt vulnerable, not as a police officer, but as a man facing his own trial. Jamal, in turn, stood firm, his face serene, but his eyes focused and full of purpose. This was his arena, and he was ready for battle. The judge entered, a woman with a firm presence, and immediately ordered everyone to sit down. She gave a brief speech about the seriousness of the case, about how any abusive action by the authorities was a stain on the entire society. "We're here to find out the truth," she said, her voice echoing like a gong. "And to ensure that justice is served." The tension in the air seemed to increase by the second, and then Jamal stood up to speak. He began calmly, telling the story of Travis O'Connor, a police officer who, over the years, had accumulated a history of violent and prejudiced approaches, but who had never been properly investigated. And as Jamal laid out detail after detail, his voice remained calm but incisive. Every word was like a stab to Travis, who was sitting on the other side, sweating and trying not to show the pressure he felt. "Madam Judge, gentlemen and ladies," said Jamal, addressing everyone in the room. "This man, Travis O'Connor, does not represent the law. He is a symbol of the abuse of power, discrimination and racism that people like me face every day. And I am here today, not just for myself, but for every person who has ever been humiliated and treated as inferior by someone who believes they are above the law." His eyes burned with determination, and the words seemed to echo through the courtroom like thunder. On the other side, Travis stood up abruptly, trying to interrupt. "This is a joke," he shouted, anger brimming in every word. "This is all an attempt to end my career. This man is a liar. He is defaming me." The judge hit the gavel hard on the bench. "Silence. Mr. O'Connor, sit down. You will have your chance to speak." Travis threw himself into the chair, breathing heavily, his face red with anger and embarrassment. Jamal kept his gaze fixed on him for a few moments, before turning his attention to the judge. The lawyer continued to present his case, now bringing in witnesses who had crossed paths with Travis over the years. They were the voices of men and women who had been intimidated by him, who had suffered his racism and brutality. Each testimony felt like a nail in the coffin for Travis, who listened through gritted teeth, anger growing like an uncontrollable flame within him. Finally, it was Travis's turn to speak. He stood up, trying to remain calm, but his voice was shaking as he spoke. "This is all a lie," he said, trying to convince the judge and jury that he was innocent. "I have always done my job according to the law. I have always defended this city and done what was necessary to keep it safe. This is a conspiracy." The judge watched closely, and it was clear that she was not convinced. Jamal, sitting next to his colleagues, had a faint smile on his face, a smile that seemed to say he knew justice was on his side. And he had one last trick up his sleeve. "Madam Judge," said Jamal, standing up again. "I have one last witness. A person who is directly connected to this case." He made a strategic pause, leaving everyone in the room gripped with suspense. "I'd like to call ahead, the chief of the Memphis Police Department, Lieutenant Robert Warren." The murmur ran through the room. Travis looked desperately at his boss, trying to understand what he would do there. The police chief was a respected figure with a long career of service to the city. And there he was, sitting on the witness stand, ready to speak. The judge allowed Jamal to continue, and the room fell into absolute silence. "Lieutenant Warren," Jamal began, "could you tell us about Sergeant O'Connor's behavior during his time at the police department?" The police chief cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. He looked at Travis with a look that mixed disappointment and sadness. "I've known Sergeant O'Connor for years," he said slowly. "And I've had doubts about some of his actions. I knew he had problems with self-control, with the way he handled certain situations, but I never thought it was something that serious." "So why are you here now?" Jamal asked, his voice calm but direct. "Because I can't turn a blind eye to what he did," replied the boss, his voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. "The truth is that he acted in a racist and abusive manner that night at the restaurant, as well as on other occasions. This does not represent what our police should be. We are here to protect and serve everyone. And when one of our own fails, he must be held accountable." Travis's gaze went blank as the room filled with murmurs and shocked expressions. He looked around, like a cornered animal with nowhere to escape. He tried to get up, he tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. It was as if all of his power, all of his authority, was being stripped from him right there, before everyone's eyes. The judge observed everything with a firm look, and after a few seconds of silence, she banged the gavel. "This court concludes that Sergeant Travis O'Connor will be suspended from duty and will undergo a full investigation into his behavior as a law enforcement officer. Until further notice, he is removed from duty." The sound of the gavel seemed to echo like thunder in the courtroom, and Travis slumped in his chair, unable to believe his ears. His entire career, everything he thought he was fighting for, was crumbling before his eyes. Jamal remained standing, observing everything with dignified calm. He didn't smile, he didn't celebrate. He just stood there, a symbol of silent justice, as Travis was led out of the courtroom, defeated and humiliated. There were no words needed for that moment, the silence was enough to show that justice had been done. But as Travis was leaving, escorted by 2 officers, he stopped and looked at Jamal. And in that look, for the first time, there was no arrogance, no hatred. There was something deeper, something he never expected to feel, fear. Jamal looked back at him, and for a moment that seemed to last an eternity, the 2 men looked at each other, as if they understood that everything had changed. Travis wanted to say something, wanted to scream, but he knew it was too late. And Jamal, with a slight tilt of his head, just said in a whisper Travis would never forget, "Now you know what it's like. Now you know how it feels." Travis was taken away, and the courtroom door closed, leaving Jamal standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by a crowd that finally understood what justice was. And so, as Travis's world fell apart, Jamal's rose stronger than ever. But, after all, what happens to a man when he is finally faced with the justice he thought he could ignore? What goes on in the mind of someone who believed they had the world under control, but now finds themselves lost in their own failures? The answer was there, on Travis O'Connor's pale face, as he disappeared from the court's view, to face the consequences of his actions, and his own hatred. And Jamal, he came out of that courtroom more than a winner. He came away as someone who had proven that when you know the rules of the game, you can turn the tables to deliver justice. The courtroom door closed, muffling the sound of Travis' footsteps being led away, but the weight of what had happened still hung in the air. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker about to explode, and all eyes turned to Jamal. He wasn't smiling with joy, his face bore the expression of restrained relief, like someone who had finally achieved justice. That moment was the culmination of years of hard work, struggle and perseverance. The tension in his shoulders finally began to dissipate, but he knew it wasn't over yet. As the crowd began to disperse, Jamal was greeted by a few people, firm handshakes, looks of respect, and words of support. But what really mattered to him was not the admiration of others, was the clear message that had been sent in that room: no one is above the law, not even a police officer like Travis O'Connor. Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed in the room. "This isn't over, Jamal. This isn't over." Travis had somehow freed himself from the officers escorting him, and for a brief moment he was free, standing at the entrance to the courthouse. His eyes were bloodshot with anger, his face red, like a bull that had just seen his red cape. The hatred emanating from Travis was palpable, and he was not willing to accept defeat so easily. Jamal turned to face him, keeping his posture firm. "It's over, Travis," he said, his voice low but full of authority. "It's over because you made it end. Your actions, your choices, that's why we're here today." There was an impressive calm in the way Jamal spoke, as if he knew those words would be the last thing Travis wanted to hear, but also the truest. "You destroyed my life," Travis shouted, his voice echoing through the empty courtroom. "Do you think you humiliated me? No, you'll see, Jamal. You'll see what it means to truly humiliate someone. This is a witch hunt, and you know it. You're doing this because I'm a white cop. Just that's why." Jamal shook his head slowly. "No. This is happening because you are a racist police officer who abused his power, who thought he could disrespect people like me and get away with it. This is about justice, Travis, something you never understood." There was a pause. The air between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words and veiled promises of revenge. For a moment, it looked like Travis was going to attack Jamal, but the officers with him held him back and began to lead him away. Still, he struggled, desperately trying to free himself. "I'm going to get you, Jamal," he shouted as he was taken away. "You're going to pay for this. Did you hear me? You're going to pay." As Travis' voice trailed down the hallway, Jamal felt a weight fall from his shoulders. That scene was not an unexpected outcome. Travis wouldn't accept the truth easily, men like him rarely do. But Jamal knew he had achieved something many thought impossible. He had managed to face injustice face to face and overcome it. And now, all that was left was to move forward and ensure that this victory was not just for him, but for everyone who faced the same kind of hate. As he left the courtroom, the sun was shining, and Jamal took a deep breath, as if absorbing the freshness of the freedom that victory gave him. But he knew he still had to weather the storm of public opinion. The cameras were out there, ready to capture every expression, every word he said. And Jamal, despite all the tension of the day, was ready for it. "Mr. Carter, how do you feel now that Sergeant O'Connor has been suspended?" a reporter asked, pushing the microphone toward him. Jamal stopped for a moment, looking around at all the eyes looking at him. "I feel relieved," he finally replied. "But this victory is not just mine. It is a victory for everyone who has been treated unfairly. Today, justice prevailed, and I hope this serves as an example for everyone who believes they are above the law. We all deserve respect and dignity, and no one has the right to take that away from us." More questions were thrown at him, but Jamal just nodded politely and kept walking, trying to leave the press buzz behind. He knew his work wasn't over yet. He had plans to use this victory as a platform for something bigger, to change the system that allowed men like Travis O'Connor to prosper for so long without consequences. That same night, Jamal returned home. A comfortable, well-appointed home, built with all the hard work of years of legal battles and personal achievements. As he sat on the couch, he closed his eyes and tried to process everything that had happened that day. But the truth was he couldn't relax. Adrenaline was still running through his veins, and there was a strange feeling that something was yet to happen. That's when the phone rang. He looked at the screen, an unknown number. With a sigh, he answered. "Hello." On the other end of the line was a voice he recognized immediately. "This is just the beginning, Jamal." Travis's voice sounded like thunder in her ears. It was a clear, cutting threat. "Do you think you beat me? This is a game, and you've only played the first round. Let's see how you do in the second half." Jamal remained silent for a few seconds, trying to control the anger that was rising inside him. "Travis," he said finally, his voice firm. "You need to stop this. You lost, and now it's time to accept the consequences of your actions. There's no point in trying to threaten me. I will continue to fight for justice, and nothing, absolutely nothing, will stop me." "You talk like you're invincible," Travis replied, his tone full of disdain. "But I will find a way, Jamal. I'm going to make you pay for every second you put me through this. You think justice is on your side, but I'm going to prove you wrong." Jamal hung up the phone. He knew Travis wasn't bluffing. This man wasn't the type to admit defeat easily, and that meant Jamal needed to be prepared for whatever came next. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and for a moment, he allowed himself to feel the fury and frustration of that day. But he also knew he needed to channel those feelings into something positive, something that would help him continue the fight for justice. He spent the rest of the night in silence, thinking about what was to come. He knew the battle with Travis wasn't over yet, but he also knew he was ready to face it, no matter what that meant. Jamal had spent his life fighting people like Travis, and he wasn't going to stop now. The next morning, as the sun rose over Memphis, Jamal was on his feet, ready to face the new day. He knew Travis was out there, that he was up to something. But he also knew that justice was on his side. And with that in mind, he put on his suit, grabbed his briefcase and headed out to work, prepared for whatever challenge came next. The war against Travis had begun, but Jamal was ready. Ready to keep fighting, ready to defend justice. Because, at the end of the day, he knew that the truth would always win. And he was there to make sure that happened. And now, the question that hung in the air was, what would Travis do? What would be the next steps for a man who was willing to do anything to get revenge? The Memphis courthouse was empty now, but the story that had unfolded there echoed throughout the city. Travis O'Connor's downfall wasn't just a legal issue, it was a watershed moment for everyone who knew what he stood for. Jamal had managed to unmask a man who abused his authority, but with that victory came a price. A shadow hung over his life now, the constant threat of an enemy willing to do anything to get revenge. Travis wasn't the kind of man who would cower in silence, and Jamal knew that. In the days following Travis' suspension, the atmosphere was tense. Newspaper headlines and TV reports discussed the case exhaustively. Travis had his supporters, people who believed he was being wronged, that he was a victim of a smear campaign run by Jamal. These voices were loud and aggressive, fueling a climate of hatred that made Jamal's daily life increasingly challenging. But he also had his defenders, who saw him as a symbol of resistance, someone who had the courage to fight against a corrupt system. Jamal's law office became a refuge where he could focus, but even there the tensions were palpable. One morning, as he was reviewing important documents for a new case, the door opened with a quick knock. It was Rashida, his personal assistant, a young and determined woman who shared Jamal's passion for justice. She looked nervous, holding a tablet in her hands. "Jamal, did you see that?" Jamal looked up from the table and saw her face, clearly disturbed. "What happened?" he asked, already preparing for the worst. Rashida placed the tablet in front of him. It was a video that had just been posted on social media. Travis O'Connor, the suspended police officer, was speaking directly to the camera, his voice full of anger and outrage. "I was wronged," he said. "I was dragged into this situation because an arrogant lawyer decided to use me to prove a point. Jamal Carter, you may have won in court, but real justice isn't served there. I'm a cop, and I'm going to prove you wrong. You will not destroy me, I will fight it." Jamal looked at the video, his expression serious, while Rashida bit her lip, worried. "What are we going to do? He's inciting people against you, Jamal. This could get dangerous." Jamal took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "We cannot be intimidated. That's exactly what he wants. Travis is trying to create a public war so that people think he is the victim. But let's do what we've always done, keep our heads up and continue with our work. He won't bring us down. But while he tried to maintain a firm stance, inside he knew that the situation was more complicated than it seemed. The pressure was building. Travis was getting desperate, and a desperate man is a dangerous man. As Jamal moved on with his life, Travis' presence became more and more constant, a shadow that seemed to lurk around every corner. He began to notice strange cars parked outside his office, unfamiliar faces watching him from afar, and anonymous messages began arriving in his email, some threatening, others just strange. But Jamal refused to give in to fear. He knew that for Travis, any sign of weakness would be a victory. One day, as Jamal was driving home after a long day at work, he noticed blue lights flashing in his rearview mirror. A police car was following him. His heart raced, but he tried to remain calm. When he stopped the car, another police officer, tall and burly, approached his window. "Good evening, sir. Documents and driving license, please." Jamal handed over the papers, maintaining a neutral expression. The police officer looked at the documents, but his expression did not change. "I know you," said the policeman. "You're the lawyer on that case, the Travis O'Connor case." Jamal nodded slowly. "Yes, it's me. Any problems with my documents?" The policeman smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "No, no problem. I was just checking. You know, a lot of us know Travis. And a lot of us think what they did to him was unfair." Jamal felt his stomach turn. This was not a routine approach. It was a warning. A clear warning that Travis still had influence within the police force, and that there were many who were not happy with what he had done. "I understand," Jamal replied, keeping his voice calm. "But I'm just doing my job, just like you." "Of course," the officer replied, returning Jamal's documents. "But be careful, Dr. Carter. Memphis can be a dangerous city." Jamal thanked him, trying to maintain his composure, but fear was beginning to creep into him. This was getting more and more personal, more and more dangerous. He knew that Travis was trying to intimidate him, and that he was willing to involve other police officers to make Jamal's life hell. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't back down. Travis wanted him to be afraid, wanted him to cower. And Jamal refused to give that taste of victory. When he got home that night, he sat on the couch, his head full of thoughts. How could he protect his family, his friends, his office, from a threat that came from someone with so much influence? He knew he couldn't just wait for it all to pass, he needed to act. The next day, Jamal made a decision. He called a press conference, but not to defend himself or attack Travis. Instead, he wanted to bring the narrative back to where it should be, about justice, about respect, about ending abuses of power. As cameras flashed and questions came from all sides, Jamal remained calm and steady. "I know there are people who are saying that I did this out of revenge, that I was attacking a man who was already down," he began, his voice full of conviction. "But this story isn't about revenge. It's about doing the right thing. Officer Travis O'Connor abused his power, and we need to ensure that this type of behavior has no place in our society. I know I'm facing powerful enemies, but that won't stop me from continuing to fight for what's right." The press conference brought attention back to the real issue, Travis' behavior and the abuse of power within the police system. But Jamal knew Travis wouldn't stand by and watch his public image be destroyed without reacting. It was a battle of narratives, of influence, of power. And while Jamal was prepared to continue the fight, he knew he needed to be ready for whatever Travis planned next. That night, when Jamal returned home, he sat alone, pondering his next steps. The pressure was mounting, and the enemy he was facing was cunning and dangerous. But Jamal was not alone. He had his team, he had his friends, and most importantly, he had the truth on his side. As he looked out the window at the nightlit city of Memphis, he knew the fight was far from over. The question was no longer if Travis would try something, the question was when. In the days that followed, tensions continued to rise. Travis tried his best to get back in control, trying to transform the narrative to make him seem like a wronged victim. His anger at Jamal grew every day, and the veiled threats became more and more evident. But Jamal, standing firm, knew the decisive moment was yet to come. It was then that, on a cloudy Friday morning, the news that no one expected exploded like a bomb. Travis had been arrested. Not for Jamal, not for revenge, but for his own actions. During the investigation that Jamal had provoked, a series of evidence came to light, revealing corruption, manipulation of evidence and coercion of witnesses. Travis had thought he was invincible for so long that he never bothered to hide his tracks. And when this evidence was exposed, even his staunchest supporters within the corporation had no choice but to cut ties with him. In court, where Travis thought he could defend himself, he finally had to confront the fact that he was alone. There was no longer a crowd of police officers to support him, nor supporters to defend him. He was alone, face to face with the justice he so despised. The sentence was clear: imprisonment for abuse of authority, racist conduct and obstruction of justice. The moment the judge handed down the verdict, Travis fell apart like a leaf in the wind. All the arrogance, all the anger, all the threats, gone. There was only one defeated man left, realizing that his actions had finally come at a price too high to pay. Jamal, sitting on the audience bench, watched everything in silence. There was no celebration, there were no smiles of revenge. He just let out a deep sigh, a sigh of relief, like someone who had finally put a stone in the past. He knew Travis would pay for every act, not just with the court sentence, but with the weight of knowing that his life, his career, and his pride had been destroyed by the very actions he believed were unquestionable. And so, as Travis was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Jamal left the room alone, feeling a calm he hadn't experienced in months. Justice had been served, but most importantly, it was done the right way, without stooping to Travis's level, without disrespecting the values he fought so hard to protect. That same day, Jamal was welcomed into the office by Rashida and her entire team, who were waiting for him with hugs, words of support and pride in what he had achieved. "You did the right thing, Jamal," Rashida said with a proud smile. "And now, what's next?" Jamal smiled, a calm smile, but full of determination. "Now, we continue. Keep fighting for what is right, keep seeking justice. Because this victory is not just mine. It belongs to all of us." A few weeks later, Travis O'Connor was officially sentenced to years in prison. His former co-workers avoided any association with him, and his reputation, once seen as untouchable, was now destroyed. The police department underwent reform, and new rules were created to prevent situations like those from happening again. Travis became an example of everything a police officer should not be. He went from hunter to hunted, someone who now knew all too well what it meant to be judged, what it meant to lose his freedom and his power. For Jamal, life continued with new opportunities, recognition for his work and a renewed sense of purpose. The victory was not just his, it was from everyone who believed that the system could work to protect the vulnerable, to give a voice to those who needed it. He continued to fight for justice, representing his community with the same determination and strength that had driven him to stand up to Travis. But this time, there was something different. There was hope. There was a feeling that things could change. And so, Jamal walked the streets of Memphis with his head held high, without looking back, without fearing the future. He had faced his greatest enemy, not with hatred or revenge, but with the firm conviction that the truth always prevails. And he knew that as long as there was injustice in the world, his work was far from over. What would you do if you were Jamal? If you were in a situation where fighting for justice meant standing up to the system, challenging those who abuse their power? Jamal's story is the story of all of us, of those who refuse to remain silent in the face of racism, prejudice and injustice. Sometimes the struggle is lonely, difficult, and seems impossible. But when we maintain our integrity, our courage, and our conviction, we can transform even the darkest situations into something greater, something that brings change, something that brings hope. Leave in the comments what you thought of this story. Do you believe that justice can always prevail? Or is the system sometimes too big to tackle? Your opinion is important and can inspire other people to fight for a better world. And if you liked this story and want to hear more narratives full of twists and emotions, don't forget to subscribe to the channel Tales of Twist. Here, each story is a battle, each character is an inspiration, and each ending is a surprise. So, leave a like, share with those who need to hear this message, and stay up to date with all the stories that are yet to come. Thanks for watching, and until the next twist.